Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and coming live from Warsaw, you're watching World News Tonight. 10 to 12 days, that's how much time Vladimir Putin has to end the war in Ukraine or face severe sanctions. Donald Trump ups his deadline from 50 days. So how will Vladimir Putin react? We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Some praise it, others don't. What will be the consequence of the trade deal between the U.S. and the EU?
Especially over the last couple of weeks.
Poland braces for extreme weather. More flood warnings in the south of the country. And U.S. and China sit for trade talks in Stockholm. "10 to 12 days, that's the new deadline U.S. President Donald Trump has given to Moscow to show progress towards ending the war in Ukraine. Trump made the announcement during a meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Scotland. Now joining me here in the studio to discuss this latest development is our Europe correspondent, Alex Cardier. Alex, you're usually going somewhere around Europe. Now you're here in the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Happy to be here.
Now, you're also going to Ukraine for the month of August, so you could potentially be there for a ceasefire if there's a proper reaction to this. But 10 to 12 days, upping from 50. How do you read into this?
Well, Don, as always, with Donald Trump, the devil is in the detail. We don't have a lot of detail at the moment. So let's start by hearing from the man himself. As you said, he was speaking with Keir Starmer in Scotland, and this is what he had to say.
I'm disappointed in President Putin, very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
So clearly a shift in narrative from Donald Trump. Now, if you think about it, it is 5 months to the day since the blowout in the Oval Office with President Zelensky. So we've seen a shift in position over the last few weeks. But as I said, we're still not clear on what ending the war looks like in this scenario. What does that actually mean? Because if you speak to the Ukrainian side, they'll tell you since 2014, Russia has breached 25 ceasefires. So if it's a 5-day break, will that be enough for Donald Trump? Will he be satisfied with what the Ukrainians would see as effectively a false ceasefire? So we don't know exactly what that would look like, and we also don't have much detail on the implementation of the secondary tariffs, the secondary sanctions that he has threatened. So we still need to know more on the detail of it, on the small minutiae, the nitty-gritty. The other thing I'd say, we have to be careful with Donald Trump's deadlines. He's given a few. One in May, a 2-week deadline to end the war in Ukraine. It's been 2 months, almost to the day. He also gave Iran 2 weeks to cease and desist on their nuclear program, and that was in June. He bombed them 3 days later. So we have to be careful with Donald Trump deadlines. But even without this detail, even without exactly how this is going to work and the mechanics behind it, if you compare this to 5 months ago, it is a significant shift in Donald Trump's position, in the US position. More weapons are going to Ukraine, more pressure on Vladimir Putin.
Right. Well, hopefully we're turning the corner here. Alex Cardier, thanks for coming in. The EU and U.S. tariff agreement announced over the weekend has evoked mixed reactions. Could this be the closure that everyone was looking for, or is this just the beginning? For now, the EU will pay 15% baseline tariffs on exports to the United States. Portrayed as the biggest deal ever made, one can't help but ask a few questions. Konrad Gorlinski addresses them in this next report.
U.S. President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have just made the biggest deal of their careers.
So we have good news. We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe. And I think you were saying this is probably the biggest deal ever reached in any capacity, trade or beyond trade.
So what's in this new deal?
We have stabilized on a single 15% tariff rate for the vast majority of EU exports.
The 15% will apply across the board and include cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. The 50% already in place on steel and aluminum will remain, but could fall later. However, there are many exemptions, including aircraft and aircraft parts, certain chemicals, some generic drugs, semiconductor equipment, some agricultural products, natural resources, and critical raw materials. Alcohol is still being worked out. Reactions for the markets were quite subdued. The German DAX fell by just 1%, while the French CAC 40 dropped just under 0.5%. In Poland, the main index dropped 1.63%, slightly more than its western neighbors.
Poland is affected, I would say, a little bit below the EU average because of a relatively small exports, direct export to the US, and at the same time, let's say, moderate trade openness. So we expect growth to be lower by 0.4 percentage points next year as a result of these tariffs. On the other hand, countries such as Czechia or Hungary are among the most affected countries in the EU because of their heavy dependence on industry and in particular on automotive industry.
The deal is not limited to just tariffs. Europe has agreed to additional points to placate Trump's belief that the old continent is treating the U.S. badly. Under the agreement, Europe will replace Russian gas with $750 billion in energy purchases from the U.S. The deal also includes $600 billion in new direct investment into the United States, along with billions more in additional U.S. military equipment purchases as Europe ramps up rearmament efforts.
But I think it's very unlikely that this is going to hold for the length of the Trump presidency. He likes using the leverage of tariffs too much, and there will be, I'm sure, some perceived injustice that he will find about the way that Europe behaves that will bring further negotiations onto the table. I think it's unlikely that this will hold all the way through.
So only time will tell whether this deal brings much-needed stability to transatlantic trade.
We've reached a deal.
Was it a good deal? Maybe it was a bad deal. EU heavyweights have spent much of Monday defending a controversial trade deal between the bloc and the United States. As capitals are grappling with the compromise, the European Commission's trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, touted the agreement as something that would bring stability to the transatlantic partnership. Here's more from our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, in Brussels.
The dust has just begun to settle on a trade deal spanning two transatlantic titans, the United States and the European Union, comprising trillions of euros in value. Now, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen flew to Scotland on Sunday to hammer out the details of this deal with US President Donald Trump. Now, as experts pore over the guts of this political agreement, we understand that there will be a baseline 15% tariff slapped on 70% of European goods exported into the US market. This is the ceiling capped for a variety of products such as car and car parts, steel and aluminium, and what we're hearing from senior Commission officials, hopefully pharmaceuticals. Now, as experts pore over the details of this agreement to discern whether or not it is in the best interest of their capitals, we understand that it was up to the negotiating nous of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that 30% tariff threat initially spearheaded by Trump was scaled down to 15%. And the European Commissioner responsible for this trade negotiation, Maroš Šefčovič, said that fighting the US to get a hopeful better deal was useless.
For some, that potential kind of other outcome might seem very appealing now, but they didn't go through all the numbers, through all the consequences, through all the impact it would have at every sector, and we did that. And therefore, with full consciousness, I'm 100% sure that this deal is better than the trade war with the United States.
That is the EU's trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, speaking to reporters there. He claims that he has flown at least 10 times between Brussels and Washington ever since US President Donald Trump took office, trying to find the best outcome between these two allies. He also went on to say that this deal spans more than just trade. It means that more support for Ukraine, more global stability between these two historic allies. We also know, however, that US President Donald Trump is expecting hundreds of billions of euros worth of investment in energy and defence. But what we're hearing from senior Commission officials is that they're not sure exactly how this will materialise, as neither of these portfolios are an EU competence, and it relies on member states individually, as well as companies who want to purchase those energy contracts on the spot market or through those LNG providers. But what we're hearing is that there is certainly will from Brussels that they will get this done. Angela Skujins from the Belgian capital for TVP World.
Central Europe braces for floods. In just 24 hours, over 100 liters of rain per square meter drenched the Jeseníky and Beskidy mountains as a low-pressure system swept across Slovakia and Poland and into northeastern Czech Republic. Now rising stream levels are triggering flood alerts across the Moravian-Silesian region. With more rain on the horizon, the question now is, how much worse could it get? Laura Ingmarsen gives us more in this report.
Heavy rainfall hit Poland on Sunday, and storms have continued into today with high intensity, causing floods and power outages. Poland's weather authority has issued level 3 alerts for the southern regions of the country, warning of heavy rain, thunderstorms, and further flooding. Despite warnings still being out, weather experts predict that the situation is gradually improving.
The worst is behind us, but still situation is quite tense and dangerous.
Polish defense minister spoke late Sunday evening about the role of the military in managing the crisis.
The armed forces are providing assistance in areas affected by flooding and heavy storms. To make this assistance more effective, we have formed 2 military task forces, in Brzeg in the Opole province and in Nisko in the Subcarpathian province. Over 2,100 fully equipped troops are standing ready to deal with the storms and their aftermath.
On Monday morning, at a crisis management team meeting, the Polish Minister of Internal Affairs commented on the government's handling of the extreme weather.
The extreme scenarios that were forecasted did not pan out, but that does not mean we're standing down any emergency services and weather monitoring staff. I know that in some locations the situation is really difficult, especially in the Bielsko area, with the Wapianica, Iłownica, and Biała rivers. We're monitoring the situation, and all emergency services are standing ready to deal with any developments.
For citizens in the affected regions, experts advise caution.
Avoid areas near rivers with high level of water. In case of a flash floods, evacuate to the higher ground and stay away from basements and cellars. Also, especially take care about the children and animals.
Natural disasters have struck Poland before. In September last year, when Storm Boris ravaged Central Europe, Poland experienced the worst floods in nearly 3 decades, with 9 lives lost.
For this time, we don't expect for tomorrow day any danger.
Looking ahead, things are likely to take a turn for the better tomorrow. This report for TVP World, Laura Ingmarsen.
And we're not out of the woods yet, as wildfires are another major concern. Europe braces for more wildfires across the continent. More than 2,400 square kilometers of land have already gone up in flames this year, double the usual average toll, and the season is still far from over. From the sun-scorched hills of Spain to the forests of the Baltics, firefighters are locked in a desperate battle against hundreds of wildfires. John Todd reports.
Fighting flames in Montenegro, where police pitched in to protect power supplies and a fuel station from wildfires. On Sardinia, eyewitness video shows smoke billowing from the edge of the beach. At least 200 people were forced to flee.
Everything up to the beach caught fire. It was a catastrophe. However, we are maybe the lucky ones.
It's a similar situation in Albania, where crews are struggling to contain 45 outbreaks in the past day alone. And in Greece, officers race to evacuate people as wildfires turned undergrowth to ashes, including near the capital, Athens. The European Commission's fire danger forecast shows a vast swathe from Spain across southern Europe to Turkey at very extreme risk of fire. Experts say the causes are rooted in climate change.
Generally, we can say the temperature is higher and amount of water retained in the system of catchment is declining due to some mismanagement. So resilience of the system is getting smaller.
So far this year, nearly 2,400 square kilometres have burned, compared to over 1,300 square kilometres this time last year. 1,250 fires have been detected over that period, against 861 for the first 7 months of 2024. In Bulgaria, a 33-year-old man, seen here, has been charged with terrorism offences for starting a blaze over the weekend that threatened a school and dozens of homes. The country's Prime Minister warned people to be careful because most fires are started by accident.
A large part of the fires, currently around 240 across the country, are due to human negligence. That is why my appeal is for citizens to show greater awareness and caution.
Experts say better land management can help prevent wildfires.
We need a kind of holistic approach in landscape planning, water management, catchment management, to really reduce probability, increase resilience of the systems.
With scorching temperatures and tinder-dry conditions set to stay, fire crews across the region are bracing for a long, hard summer. John Todd for TVP World.
Now that the U.S. has a deal with the EU concerning trade, it's on to China. Top U.S. and Chinese negotiators met in Stockholm on Monday for a two-day meeting. They will focus on easing trade tensions between the world's two largest economies and extend the negotiation process to finalize levies on each other's goods. After the last meeting in Switzerland, the United States imposed 30% duties on Chinese goods, while Beijing slapped U.S. imports with 10% tariffs. Sonia Gata-Bishchan has more details in this next report.
U.S. and Chinese officials arrived in Stockholm. Will they also arrive at a trade deal? The American Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the two sides will be working out what is likely an extension of the deadline to do so, as Beijing presently faces an August 12th deadline to secure a lasting tariff deal with Donald Trump's administration.
If no deal is reached by August 12, it means the imposition of the tariffs that were promised by Donald Trump, and that means also predominantly, it means huge disruption in the international trade and exchange of goods and services between the two biggest economies in the world.
On Friday, Trump suggested the U.S. has confines of a deal with China. The Stockholm meeting follows talks in Geneva and London, all of which came after Trump threatened China with 145% tariffs.
So, if you look at that, China, first row.
Ahead of the meeting, Bessent said the two countries are in a good place, with the U.S. having lowered tariffs to 30% on Chinese goods and China setting a 10% tariff on U.S. products for 90 days as they try to reach a deal. All while experts predict that the Stockholm talks are predominantly setting the scene for another meeting.
President Xi has invited me to China, and we'll probably be doing that in the not too distant future, a little bit out, but not too distant.
And I think this is what people look at. The result of the summit is the preparation of the big meeting later this year, probably in the autumn, between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. And then this is the time where most people expect the dispute to be finally resolved.
The trade talks between the U.S. and China in Stockholm will continue on Tuesday, and analysts expect that the sides will agree to keep tariffs at their present levels. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gata-Bishchan.
We have a trade deal between the European Union and the United States. Many are breathing a sigh of relief that an all-out trade war was averted, while others are criticizing the deal, pointing out that tariffs on EU goods have trebled. Now, joining us to walk us through the pluses and minuses of the agreement is Ian Begg, professorial Research Fellow at the London School of Economics. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening to you.
Yes, now, well, I guess first off, is this a good deal? 15% baseline tariffs, effectively tripling tariffs on EU imports to the United States.
Well, I think it's good in the sense that it could have been a lot worse, in that until recently Trump was threatening 30% tariffs and even higher tariffs for steel and aluminium products. So there'll be relief in some European capitals that it's been scaled down a bit. That said, yes, it's going to be more costly for European exporters because they will have either to accept lower sales because the price of their materials plus tariffs will be higher than it was previously in the US market, or they're going to have to absorb some of the cost and thereby lower profits. So either way, it's going to be an element of pain for most European exporters trying to sell to the US.
Right. Now, I've been talking to experts for months now about this. Many people tending to wave on the side that actually consumers will bear the cost of these tariffs. But do you think that actually companies, in order to remain competitive in the U.S. market, are going to have to eat some of their margins and some of these tariffs?
Well, it's going to vary product by product. If it's something for which there is no viable U.S. domestic producer, then there is more likelihood that it will be the American consumers who pay the tariff. If, on the other hand, and there are many markets where this is the case, there's going to be a strong US competitor who has no change in their price levels, then the possibility of having to eat some of the tariff will arise. So you have to look at it case by case rather than saying there's a single answer.
Now, do you think that the EU could have done better in its negotiations with the United States? We see a lot of opinions out there that are saying that actually, tripling of the tariffs on European goods is not a great outcome.
Well, I think we should get away from referring back to the tripling. Instead, look as I said earlier, at the worst case that it could have been. 15% tariffs is not that far away from what the EU imposes on the US for many products. So it's a degree of equilibration going on relative to what could have happened. But I think some of the critics have been very vocal in saying this is a bad deal for Europe in many respects. The trouble is we don't know all the details, and there are plenty of details that could make a big difference, be it in pharmaceuticals or alcohol products, where we don't yet know on the detailed tariff lines whether they're going to face particularly higher tariffs. Trump is capricious, and we know that he could change his mind when the detailed negotiations take place, or he could delegate it to others and then jump in at the last minute and say, no, I'm not accepting that because somebody in Ohio or Texas has said this is not satisfactory. We've certainly heard criticisms from a number of European leaders, not least Viktor Orban in Hungary, saying that Trump had von der Leyen for breakfast. She's no negotiator. He took her to the cleaners, to use a different metaphor. The French have been very unhappy about it because they fear that some of their products are going to suffer as a result of this. So I think we need to wait to see how the detail unfolds before we make a strong judgment on it. And I can see you, Viktor Orban, behind me, next to me on the screens, telling us how bad it is.
Well, do you think this is a done deal? Are we out of the woods yet? Or is there something that could still happen to kind of spark the fears of a trade war all over again before the deal goes from framework to a legal?
It's an outline deal, and trade deals typically take a very long time to negotiate in all the detail that is required. What exactly is the definition of a product? If it's something that contains steel, is it subject to the 50% tariff or the 15% tariff, et cetera, et cetera. So we should avoid jumping to judgment on whether this is a deal that everybody can rejoice in or despair of until we see what happens in the next few months. And it won't be hours or days. It will take months, maybe even into years before it's finalized. So let's wait.
Well, with the very on the surface information that we have at this time, European industries you think are going to be hit the worst by this? I mean, first comes to mind, say, European auto sales in the United States. But if we look at the deal that Japan just made, and roughly the two countries, the European Union and Japan, export roughly about 50 billion or so dollars worth of autos to the United States in parts. It was acceptable for the Japanese. So how do you think that the auto industries are going to fare?
Well, I think we already know part of the answer. The shares of German car manufacturers went up when they heard the terms of the deal, because had they been facing 30%, as had been pre-announced, it would be far more damaging to their business models than 15%. 15%, I suspect they can absorb with a combination, as we discussed earlier, of eating some of the tariff and raising prices to American consumers. So it's not going to destroy their markets. But much higher tariffs could well have destroyed their markets and forced them to look elsewhere for potential sales. So they'll be, I think, tolerably happy that it's come in this way.
Ireland faces somewhat of a dilemma. It could have 10% under the UK plan and 15% under the EU-US deal. Are they stuck between a rock and a hard place?
No, Ireland is not part of the United Kingdom. Only Northern Ireland is. And because Ireland negotiates as part of the European Union, it will face the same terms as all other 26 member states of the European Union. Now, Irish reactions have been cautious, I think, so far. They're saying, let's look at it. Let's see whether some of those things that we've attracted into our country, particularly with a favourable foreign investment terms, are going to be hit. Part of what Trump is up to is trying to repatriate foreign investment that he thinks has gone unfairly to other countries. And Ireland is probably more vulnerable than other EU member states in that respect, because if big Irish industries, which have been lured in by favourable terms of foreign direct investment, are then lured back to the US, it could be damaging to the Irish economy. The same is true of other countries, some of them in Central and Eastern Europe, which have been pretty good at attracting foreign direct investment, though less so than the American-dominated Irish one.
Donald Trump also touted that there are going to be major opportunities for U.S. agriculture in Europe, as well as the U.S. auto industry. Do you think that the Europeans are going to be interested in either of those sectors?
In some respects, yes. We have the famous idea of chlorinated chicken, which Europeans are desperately opposed to. They don't want their chicken to be dipped in chlorine. But there are other areas where US exports of agri-food products may well be something that Europeans are prepared to buy. You didn't mention energy, but part of the deal is a huge increase in EU imports of American energy, probably unrealistically so, because the value that's being touted of over 200 billion is so much above what the US currently exports to Europe that some energy analysts are saying it's just not attainable. It's probably a fiction, in the same way as the huge imports that China was supposed to make of American energy are not going to be realized. So it adds to all this uncertainty about whether the deal as put on paper at the weekend will materialize in the form that it's been touted.
In the event that it does materialize, do you think after the NATO summit, the reaffirmation of NATO, Article 5 by the United States, and now this trade deal, do you think that finally the US-EU relationship is going to heal? And is this maybe the end of the turmoil with the Trump administration?
Predicting Trump is a fool's errand, because we know that he can change his mind because somebody speaks to him the wrong way or makes a joke about him or some other inconsequential effect that causes him to change what he's currently agreed. But I think we do see signals across the board. A second way of looking at Russia from what he practiced over the first 4 months of his presidency, looking far more hostile way at Russia, maybe being more supportive of Ukraine, maybe accepting that NATO is here to stay. All these things point in the direction of a better relationship. But I think we should not lose sight of the fact that the European Union is not in a very strong negotiating position with some of the things that Trump wants to achieve. He's enjoyed successes in pushing countries other than Poland, obviously, to boost their defence expenditure, and he may well come back with further demands that will make life uncomfortable for Europe, not just in trade, but in other areas.
Okay, well, time will tell. Ian Begg, Professorial Research Fellow at the London School of Economics. Thank you so much for joining us on World News tonight.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.